So we are going to go through and analyze page 1 of the speech. If you notice, I've gone ahead and I've noted at the top what literary devices you need to be focusing on. Don't waste time going through and color coding and highlighting this on yours. Just know that this is what we're going to be looking for. It's color coded to help you guys follow along with me. So just make sure that you make note of these things. If you already have highlighters out, that's fine. But it's not that important that you guys color code this to match mine. So if we go ahead and look at the first page, you'll notice that Frederick Douglass is already using a lot of rhetorical questions. Now we know that an author asks rhetorical questions to get his audience thinking and questioning and considering his position. But you have to also remember that Frederick Douglass was invited to give this speech as a 4th of July celebration, even though he was in fact an escaped slave. So in this speech, they are expecting him to provide them statements talking about the wonders of America, how America stands for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and how we should all support and celebrate that because he escaped the South in search of those things. What the people who ran the convention didn't realize is how incredibly ironic it is to ask a former enslaved man to give that speech. And so instead of giving the statements about how wonderful America is, he ends up asking a series of very pointed questions. And if we just look at some of these, fellow citizens, pardon me and allow me to ask, why am I called upon to speak here today? Or, are the great principles of political freedom and of natural justice embodied in that Declaration of Independence extended to us? Both of these answers, this is no, they are not. Am I there called upon to bring a humble offering to the national altar and to confess the benefits and express devout gratitude for the blessings resulting from your independence to us? Yes, that is exactly what they're expecting him to do. So in the process of asking these rhetorical questions, Douglass points out the irony and hypocrisy of the abolitionists that invited him to speak. Because remember, they're asking him to speak on the issue of freedom and equality and liberty, and those are all things that he has been denied his entire life. If we look at the first paragraph, he says, why am I called here to speak here today? What have I, or those I represent, to do with your national independence? Are the great principles of political freedom and natural justice embodied in that declaration extended to us? From blessings resulting from your independence to us? So if we look at his diction, in this first paragraph, he is already making the distinction between the white, free abolitionists, with you and your, and the slaves, or African Americans, with us, or we, or I. So he's drawing a distinction between both of them right at the beginning. Would to God, for both your sake and ours, that an affirmative answer could be truthfully returned to these questions. Then would my task be light and my burden easy and delightful. For who is there so cold that a nation's sympathy could not warm him? Who so obdurate to the dead claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge such priceless benefits? Who is so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee when the chains of servitude have been torn from his limbs? So we get the distinction between us and you very early on in the first 2 paragraphs of the speech. And I remember Douglass has been invited to speak at this event, and so this is a pretty bold move to give a speech to abolitionists on the 4th of July, and within the first, 8 sentences or so, distance the reality of the audience from the speaker. Because remember, in rhetoric, you want to actually heighten the similarities between the speaker and the audience. You want to be able to persuade people. But Douglas thinks that if he makes them focus on the differences between them, that is going to do a much better job of actually persuading them to see his point than if he tried to make them seem as though they're the same. So purposely, showing the lack that the speaker and audience have in common. Now, if we go back and we look at how Douglas is structuring this, we will notice that not only does he use a series of rhetorical questions, and not only does he have very pointed diction, but he's also already utilizing irony. So a lot of the main rhetorical devices that he uses throughout this speech, we already see a plethora of in the first two paragraphs. So this is really good to sort of let you guys understand just how densely packed all of the literary devices in this speech are going to be. And we're not even going to be able to go through and identify them all because there are so many, because the speech is so masterfully crafted and Douglas is such a good orator. We could legitimately spend 2 or 3 days just breaking down every single part of this speech. But for the first two paragraphs, just make sure that you know how he uses rhetorical questions and his use of diction, his use of irony, and how he's showing the differences between the audience and the speaker to make his point, which is a big departure from how we normally see speakers do this, which is they try to relate to their audience. In paragraph 3, Douglas says, "But such is not the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary." So, if you picked up on this during your first read-through, that's excellent. What you will notice is that Douglas refers to the celebration of the 4th of July as a pale, glorious anniversary. This is a pun. He is obviously playing on words here and calling the celebration of the 4th of July a pale or white glorious anniversary, because obviously if you're not white, if you're a slave, then you don't celebrate the 4th of July because you don't have freedom, and as we know, according to the Dred Scott case, you are not actually considered a citizen of the United States. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. Do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? So once again, he has made his point with the use of the pronouns you, us, me, you, I, pointing out the difference between the audience, which again is white abolitionist, and himself. And when he asks this final rhetorical question here on the first page, he is very pointedly asking the audience if they meant to mock him. So he's pointing out, nicely in fact, that they have actually insulted him by asking him, a man who's not considered a citizen of the United States and an escaped slave, to talk about the celebration of the 4th of July and how wonderful freedom and liberty is. He's doing it so that they definitely get the point by the end of the 3rd paragraph, but through his use of diction, through his use of syntax, through his use of rhetorical questions and rhetoric, pointing this out to them doesn't come off as rude. It comes off as very pointed and intellectual, and in fact, quite nice, quite polite, given how he could have responded to their request. So he's pointing out they have insulted him. he asks this rhetorical question, he lets them know that if, in fact, you were asking me to speak so that you could mock me, there is a response to that mockery from God. And he says, if so, there is a parallel to your conduct. Let me warn you that it is dangerous to copy the example of a nation, Babylon, whose crimes, towering up to heaven, were thrown down by the breath of the Almighty, burying that nation in irrevocable ruin. I can today take up the plaintive lament of a peeled and woe-smitten people. Now, what he is doing here is he is alluding to the Bible, and then he provides the exact lines. Now, remember that he would not have had the written form of this speech in front of him. He would have recited this section of the Bible from memory. Remember that this is not something that's uncommon for the time period, and it would have shown his audience just how educated and intelligent he was and well-read he was. If they couldn't already tell through his use of amazing syntax and diction and rhetorical devices, if that still wasn't enough, he then goes and cites an entire passage of the Bible from memory. So, shows his intelligence, but also appeals, and we know that whenever we see appeals to values, morality, beliefs, and ethics, that we see an appeal to ethos. So he's put his audience in the position where he asks them the rhetorical question, do you mean, citizens, to mock me by asking me to speak today? There are only two options to answering this question. Either no, they did not actually mean to mock him, and they did not mean to insult him, even though they have, or yes, they meant to mock him. Now, if they meant to mock him, he has a response from God, from the Bible, that points out, well, the last time this happened, when one group of people decided to mock another group of people that they had imprisoned, God smote them and destroyed their entire civilization. So they can't really say, yes, we asked you here to mock you, because if they consider themselves to be law-abiding and fearful Christians, they can't refute a direct quote from the Bible. They can't say that's not true. They have to acknowledge that they are actually doing something that is wrong in the eyes of God. And even, if they asked him without meaning to insult him, they at least can't interrupt his speech. They can't stop him. They have to acknowledge that they have insulted him, and then they're going to have to apologize. So either way, he puts his white audience in the position of, one, hearing what he has to say, two, having to concede that he does have the right to speak now that they've asked him up on stage, or three, that they are in fact mocking him, and that there's precedence for this situation that they'll be punished by God for doing so. So it's really smart the way he sets this up so that his audience is in a position to have to continue to listen to the rest of the speech and really pay attention. Because either way, after page 1 of this speech, his audience has to acknowledge that they have either purposely insulted this man or they have mocked this man. Now, if we go back really quick and just review over what we've seen on page 1, we have allusion, we have lots of elevated diction, really important use of rhetorical questions all throughout the first page. And if we look at the top, we see that we've made a note about parallelism. If we look, Douglas loves parallelism. He uses it throughout the entire speech, so I'm not going to highlight it every single time, otherwise this whole page would be pink, but I am on each page and go back and point out a few of them to you that are really effective. So in the second paragraph, he says that he wishes, for both your sake and ours, that an affirmative answer could be given to these questions. Would my task be light, and my burdens easy and delightful? Who so obdurate and dead to the claims of gratitude that would not thankfully acknowledge priceless benefits? Who so stolid and selfish that would not give his voice to swell the hallelujahs of a nation's jubilee? So he's repeating the same phrases again and again and again. He does this again down here. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not rejoiced in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence